Hello and welcome to Real Hi-Fi Help. Let's talk about power coupling loss through converting country standards. So what I'm talking about is power plugs here fitting into power sockets, and you might be coming from like Brazil over to France or whatever, and then in order to convert that power, you would have to use some kind of way of doing that. And that's the thing that the video is about. So let's just take an example. You want to go from the UK standard over to Japan, perhaps because you're moving. Maybe it's some kind of a job situation. So yeah, you'll then go from this 230 volt standard over to Japan, which is 100 volt apparently. And let me just talk about that. Because I actually have a friend, and I know a couple of people that did this before, and there's actually something quite worrying about doing this sound-wise. So yeah, won't be a long video. So what it basically is that when you do these things, when you convert power standards, it can work, it can still play in a safe way. But the problem is that it usually messes up the sound in all kinds of ways. I'm talking about basically everything potentially falling apart. I know one guy who has some pretty good equipment, way above average. And apparently his sound is, I would say about a third of what it should be in that class. And that's even though that he has a lot of different parts that are pretty up there, pretty up there in quality. Also know another guy that I visited, I think it was about 5 years ago, on the used market, and I also think that he used some UK gear and tried to convert it over to the Danish standard, and it also sounded wrong, in a lot of different ways. It was almost beyond repair, that sound. And I just feel that I need to tell people that stop doing this, stop converting, because it will work. You'll get away with it, but sound wise, you'll have a sound that's so bad that most likely it will be equivalent to you owning a Sonos piece of gear running wireless over to some Spotify stuff, and even though you've paid 5, 10, 20, 30, $50,000, forget it. Most of that money is basically just gone. And if you on top of that don't have an earth connection, or if it's a bad earth connection, forget it. It just gets even worse. Thin, harsh, all over the place. Once you get into these systems, it's almost like doesn't matter how much money you're pumping into a system like that. It's almost lost. It's a lost cause basically. So I wouldn't do it, and it's a sad thing to deal with. Then you'll have to buy some equipment in that country that you're living in, or probably a neighboring country if they follow the same power standards. And it's a hard thing to deal with. But I feel that once you start converting at the base level, everything that happens at the base level, if it isn't dealt with in a proper way, it will go through the entire chain. And it doesn't matter how much you repair the signal and how much you use a lot of money on this and that. It will of course sound better, but most likely it will sound broken in so many different ways that I just can't cover with one video. And you'll be doing a lot of compensating, because you just can't get to the root of the problem. It's a bit like being on some kind of medication, and in order to have that medication, you need some other medication. But that medication gives you, some irritation with your back, and then you get some other medication to deal with that, and then this medication makes you drunk or fall downstairs or whatever, and then you need another medication to deal with that. It's basically that type of problem. So I try to stay away from this, and again, you have to think about what people are doing with their systems is that they're already, even though they're following the country standards and they're running, for example, sugar plug into sugar plug, and it's Germany, and everything sugar plug, they still might at the streamer do a lot of converting that's at a low level. And again, you're basically killing sound when you're doing that, because when you're using all of these small gadgets on the streamer, for example, you better be doing that with some unusually high quality ways of converting signal. Won't get too much into that, but you need a proper earth connection. If you have a system, if you have a hi-fi system that costs more than, I would say, $5,000 all in all, I would say you need an earth connection, or else it's just basically a waste of time, because an earth connection helps cement the sound, solidify it, make it relevant and interesting. If you don't have that, it's going to be all jumpy, nervous energy, thin, harsh, all kinds of things. And if you on top of that have bad acoustics and you have subpar equipment, and then you do all of this converting stuff, it's going to be a nightmare, and there's so many people out there fishing around for really bad gear, going from one $500 amp to another, and then perhaps in 5 years they'll get like $1,000 amp, and and what they're basically doing is that they're just biasing sound. So they're going from a thin analytical sound over to an overly warm sound that doesn't have any definition, and then they'll probably take something new that's more fancy after that. And you're just removing a band-aid and putting on another part of your body that gets hurt. It's that kind of level that you're solving a problem at. So I just recommend don't doing it. Just not doing that at all. And let me show you another thing, a big thing in my country that a lot of people ignore, that they don't think really exists as a problem. There's this shogo standard here, that we have in most parts of Europe. And I can't remember if it's 220, 30, 40 volts, whatever. And they fit into these sockets here, that's fine. But in Denmark, for example, this is just an example, what they do is usually they connect a Danish power bar to this, and then they put their German Schoko plugs in that. And just notice, how the hell is this earth connection here going to get earth from this connection here? It can't, but it will still fit in the plug, so that a lot of people think that, oh yeah, no problem. Or they could have like a Danish power bar here, this is a Danish power bar. It goes in here, earth connection, and you connect that. Good. You have Danish plugs. They look like this. You connect that to this, but where do you connect the earth connection here to that on the power bar? You can't. So you're basically going to have earth connection all the way over to the wall socket, but not from the power bar over to your equipment. So it's like a half earth connection. And that's one of the reasons why I would say sound generally in my country is pretty bad, where countries like Germany, and I don't know what standards do we have here. There's a lot of countries following the same standard. Interesting. So I feel that I think we all basically use Shogo plugs in most of these countries here, don't we? I don't know, man. I think all of these 220 and 230 countries who use Shogo plugs. I can imagine that Italy, Germany, France. I would imagine that being the same. I think it's only places like the US, the UK, Japan, places like that, Brazil, where they have these very special weird plugs. But you just have to use your own logical sense that using a power bar that's connected with a thing like this that doesn't have an earth connection is bad. This here is bad. This here is bad. This here, it's better, but it's still bad. So what you should do is, if you live in places like Denmark, of course, check this with your electrician. But what I did, like nobody else does in my country, almost nobody else, I use a Oyade SWOXXXE plug, I think it's called. And it's basically the best wall plug I've been able to find. The other Oyade plugs are also pretty damn good. But then I get a proper earth connection here. It travels through, let's just call this here. Then we just call this here what matches the partner plug. And it just travels all the way to the gear, solid earth connection, and I can use some proper cables because there's some proper plugs. Whereas when you mess around with these in-country lower standards and low quality plugs and low quality cables and stuff like that, and you convert country standards, it's gonna sound sucky. It's gonna be subpar crap sound, and you're most likely gonna end in a situation where it's like not really sure, it's a bit on the thin side, so yeah, I'm not really into that harsh type of sound. I'm just gonna put some warm cables on. You are going to naturally be inclined going towards cables that are like Cardas, Fendenhull, stuff like that, the warmish type of cables, and you're going to miss out on a lot of detail. Of course, some systems might even sound good with cables like that. But what I'm saying is that you have to solve a problem at the highest level, okay? Because if you solve problems in a way where you're compensating, and you're doing this at the root, when you make mistakes like this at the root, power source, your router, where you have your network, when your streamer is crap, when your room is crap, these are giant faults that will haunt us later on. So even if you buy a much better amp, a much better speaker, these things will show. There will still be huge traces of these problems in your sound. So if you want to save a lot of money, do what I suggest, and make sure that you try and get a Shoko standard. Of course, assuming what country that you live in, because you can't use Shoko in the UK, you can't use it in the US, and other countries. But if you can in your country, if it's legal, of course, ask your technician, maybe electrician, sorry. Maybe he has to do the job, but listen to him, get his advice, do what's legal, and try and follow the if it's possible, the European Shoko standard, or the American or the British or whatever standard. I'm not sure how many standards there are of plugs, but it can make a really big difference, and you can save a lot of money doing this. So you definitely don't want to travel like you don't want to switch over to a country where you're there for several years and you're using like an isolate box or gigawatt box or whatever box, and it's the UK standard, and you're going over to Germany or Denmark or whatever. Forget that. You know, that isolate box is shot dead. You know, even if it is one of the best boxes in the world, I think it's the best box in the world, but all the good that box does basically gets killed when you convert power. And some people can save it. Some people that are very talented, they can save it. They can do some good compensation. But I wouldn't suggest doing that. That's going to cost so much money to fix. You might as well get a less fancy box from the country that you're currently in, and just use that. You know, I have a friend that uses a PS Audio power bar, and I haven't heard it myself, but I trust him. He says that it's a pretty decent power bar for the money. I have no idea what a thing like that costs, but use stuff like that. Use like a basic PS Audio power bar, or perhaps something like, I don't know, a basic isolate power bar that's in your country, or perhaps a gigawatt or something like it. You know, you can look out for stuff like that. But just know this: every time you convert a signal, especially on the power side, you're making things a lot more difficult, and you're creating problems that are so difficult to solve. So yeah, that's basically just what I wanted to tell you guys about. And like and subscribe if you can. Have a nice day.